Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at August 15th, 1947. Now that date, it's celebrated, right? India's Independence Day, a moment of incredible hope.
Absolutely, a huge moment, but it's also inseparable from the partition of India.
Exactly. That decision to create two nations.
Yeah.
It didn't just divide land, it tore through communities, families, individual lives.
And I think that's the core thing here. A major political decision, maybe seen as necessary by some at the time, instantly became this human catastrophe on a scale that's hard to fathom.
Independence was the goal, the triumph, but partition. That triggered something else entirely. Mass displacement, horrific violence.
It really did. The creation of India and Pakistan, done so quickly, it forced over 14 million people from their homes.
14 million.
And the number of lives lost. Estimates vary, but between 1 and 2 million. It's one of the biggest, most devastating forced migrations in history.
Yeah.
Mostly driven by religious lines, the call for a separate Muslim state.
Okay, so let's dig into that a bit. History books give us the overview, the maps changing, the key dates.
Right, this sort of high-level view.
But what gets lost often are the personal stories, the individual voices. And that's what we want to focus on in this deep dive. Get beyond the statistics.
And these stories, they show the real human cost, don't they? They give you that ground-level perspective that you just don't get from the broader historical sweep. It reminds you history happens to people.
Right, people dealing with unbelievable loss, but also sometimes incredible resilience. So we've set the stage with the sheer scale. Let's maybe look at the history that sometimes gets a bit glossed over.
Yeah, the context.
The British leaving, India and Pakistan forming. It sounds neat on paper.
Far from neat in reality.
Neighbors, people who'd lived together for generations, suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of a line drawn, well, pretty arbitrarily on a map.
And the speed, that's crucial. It happened so fast.
Too fast. There was no real plan, no infrastructure, no security to manage this massive movement of people.
Which just created this environment of intense fear, uncertainty, and it led to terrible violence. People forced out with, barely the clothes on their backs.
So connecting this back,
Yeah.
partition wasn't just about borders changing. It was a traumatic uprooting, deeply personal.
Losing your home, your community, everything you knew.
Yeah.
Facing constant threats. Those scars, they lasted. They still last.
Okay, building on that human element, let's maybe focus on one powerful symbol of all this displacement. The train.
Ah, yes. The trains became such a central image, didn't they? Almost iconic in a really tragic way.
These incredibly crowded carriages, people packed in, heading towards an unknown future, often in just horrific conditions.
And some never arrived. The ghost trains, as they were sometimes called.
Yeah, arriving empty or worse, bearing signs of the violence that happened along the way.
That train journey really captures the desperation, the extreme danger. It was meant to be a lifeline, maybe the only route to safety for many.
But it's also such a vulnerable target. The whole situation was so volatile.
Exactly, and the stories from those trains, they swing wildly between, this desperate hope for a new start and just unimaginable terror. It's strange how transport, something that usually connects us, became the symbol of trauma.
It really makes you think about the complete breakdown of order, doesn't it?
It does.
We found this one account really moving. A memory from a woman now in her 80s talking about her journey as a little girl from Lahore to Delhi.
Okay.
And she described just holding onto her mother's hand so tightly. The heat, the hunger, but mostly the fear. A thick, heavy silence because everyone was too scared to speak.
Wow. Just a child experiencing that.
And they didn't even have a clear destination. We have to leave. We have to get somewhere, anywhere across that new border.
That sense of uncertainty really comes through in so many accounts. Families just cast adrift, no idea where they'd end up, what would happen next. Survival was everything.
Yeah. Find any place that felt safer, even if safe was still completely uncertain.
And, while her family made it, thankfully.
We know so many others didn't. Refugee trains were attacked. Brutally. The loss of life was just staggering.
The journey itself was a gamble, a terrifying gamble.
It just highlights the vulnerability, doesn't it? Ordinary people completely caught up in these huge historical forces. That one story, it kind of sums up the fear, the uncertainty, the reliance on these fragile lifelines.
And think about the long-term impact of just surviving that. Witnessing violence, losing everything, arriving somewhere new, often hostile with nothing. The psychological scars, they must have been incredibly deep.
Absolutely. And while those stories of loss are just overwhelming, you also find these these little sparks of resilience,
Yeah.
of hope for reconnection.
Yeah, amidst all the chaos, families were torn apart, just fractured in unimaginable ways.
But that need for connection, for family, it didn't just vanish. It persisted, sometimes for decades, across huge distances.
It's pretty powerful, isn't it? That strength of family ties. Even after years, with barely any way to communicate back then, people kept searching.
And those stories of reunion, they might be rare, but they offer such a vital glimmer of hope.
They really do.
We read about a brother and sister, separated as children, just lost in the crowds trying to cross the border.
Okay.
Decades went by. No news, no way to find each other. It seemed impossible.
Yeah, back then, how would you even start?
But then, years later, social media,
Yeah.
a chance connection online led to them finding each other again. After all that time.
Wow. That's incredible. Modern tech bridging a gap created by history.
Right. It really shows how long those separations lasted, but also how connections can sometimes be remade, even against the odds.
It highlights that enduring impact, but also, yeah, the unexpected ways hope can surface.
And there was this detail in their story, so touching. The brother, every year on Rosh Hashanah, the festival celebrating siblings, he would tie a raki, the thread, onto a tree. It was his way of holding on to hope, a symbol of his love for his sister, wherever she was.
Oh, wow.
It's those small personal things, isn't it? They just cut right through the massive historical event and show you the depth of human feeling underneath it all.
Absolutely. Those quiet acts of remembrance, of hope, they say so much about human resilience, about the power of family, even in the absolute worst of times.
So these individual stories, they paint such a vivid picture. Loss, resilience.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember, these weren't just isolated incidents. The effects of partition, well, they're still being felt today.
Oh, definitely. The echoes are loud. It wasn't just 1947 and done. Its legacy is woven right into the subcontinent's politics, its borders, its collective memory. It's still unfolding in many ways.
Yeah, the tensions that still exist, the complex situation around the borders, a lot of that traces directly back to how partition happened.
Right. Those borders were drawn so hastily under immense pressure. They continue to be sources of conflict and have shaped the whole geopolitical landscape of the region ever since.
And it's not just politics, is it? There's the intergenerational impact.
That's huge. The children, even grandchildren of survivors, people born long after 1947, they often carry that inherited trauma.
How does that work exactly?
Well, it's complex, but children can absorb the unspoken stories, the emotional burdens, the anxieties of their parents or grandparents, even if they didn't experience partition themselves. It shapes their identity, their sense of belonging, their understanding of history.
Right. The questions, the guilt maybe, the pride, the pain, it all gets passed down somehow.
It's a recognized thing, this transmission of trauma across generations.
We came across a historian who put it quite starkly. He called partition both the cost of freedom and a wound we never truly addressed.
That really captures the paradox, doesn't it?
Yeah, a moment of national triumph, independence,
Yeah.
but intertwined with this immense human suffering. And the long-term consequences are still playing out.
That duality is key, I think. It marks the end of colonialism, the birth of nations, yes. But it also left this deep scar on the collective psyche, a scar that still influences things today.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into these personal stories from the partition of India. It's a difficult part of history to confront, but so important.
Absolutely. And listening to these individual experiences, you get a much deeper, much more human understanding of what happened and why it still matters.
And if you, listening, have family stories connected to partition,
We really hope you'll share them, keep them alive. These personal narratives are just invaluable. They ensure we don't forget the human cost.
we really believe remembering these stories isn't just about honoring the past. It helps us build more empathy, more understanding today.
It highlights why we need to look beyond just the headlines, the big historical narratives, and connect with the individual lives that shape our world.
Our next deep dive will take us to different stories, different places, but we'll continue trying to uncover that human element within history.
So, until then, keep asking questions, keep learning.
Keep your curiosity alive. And, as always, try to choose kindness.
Definitely. Connect with the stories around you.